So to my guest, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. How are you doing? How you feeling?
Feeling good. It's, the struggle is real. It's a Thursday, so like the
Yeah.
whole week.
We was just talking about, I was telling her, I think they putting something in the air because I was like super tired. And then she was telling me about, it's the first week of school. So she's been super busy with her kids.
Yeah, I have they're in two separate campuses this year, so I feel like I'm being stretched in two separate directions. So it's been a struggle.
Yeah, I told her to get a drink, y'all, because she look like she over it.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, how was your vacation?
It was good. It was really good. We go to Costa Rica. We've been going to Costa Rica for like 3 years now as a family
Oh, nice.
at the end of the summer. And it's just like always, it's like my happy place because it's such a chill environment and it's like a place where you can sort of come off the stress of the United States. And so it's always a really good recharge.
Yeah, I love Costa Rica. What makes you go there every year? Like, what was that? Why was that the main point?
Uh, I mean, I first went, it was like 2021, right after what after they had really just like reopened the border after COVID.
Hmm.
And I just fell in love with it. Like it's just so laid back and a really kid-friendly place. And so then I found a summer camp there that my kids can go to. And so they go to camp and
Oh,
usually
wow. So you like a local.
well, I don't know about all that, but it's a great like language camp that they go to for a couple weeks in the summer. And it allows me to like still work for part of the trip, so I don't have to take off the whole time.
Yeah.
Um, and they have fun and we all surf and do just like just really fun vacation-y type stuff, so
Yeah. And the food there is really good, y'all. So
it is really
fresh.
good.
Yeah. Amazing. Now, I was telling you this off air, but when I was reading your book the whole time, I was just like, WTF. So, do you ever look back in your life and think to yourself, like, how did all this happen?
I have had those moments for sure,
Hmm.
but I try not to be that type of person that's like, oh my gosh, I'm like stuck in this victimhood of like all this stuff happening to me.
Right.
uh I have learned that there's scary people out there, and I think this could really happen to anyone. And for
Hmm.
sure, I think I I was fairly naive when I met him.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, there's definitely like risk factors that I had that I probably that at least for me as a parent, I'm trying to teach my daughters to
Yeah.
recognize those sorts of things so that they do not repeat the same mistakes that I made. But yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily feel that I'm like highly unlucky or, I have because I don't actually feel that way. I think I am very fortunate and I've had a lot of amazing blessings in my life.
Hmm.
But I just think, yeah, I am a person who had a terrible tragedy happen to me. But I think that, a lot of people live through really terrible things. So I don't
Yeah.
necessarily think that, yeah, I try not to dwell too much on like, oh my gosh, this happened to me, because I also don't want it to be like a defining moment in my life.
Right. That's one of my next question about after all these years, have there been any misconceptions about your story that you like to address? And one of the things that I felt like is very relatable is that this can happen to anyone.
Yeah. I think there is a lot of misconception. I think there's it's actually psychologically protecting to hear about tragedies like this, hear
Hmm.
about women and sometimes men too who fall in love with psychopaths and have horrible things happen to them. It's protective to think that, to kind of take this mentality of like, oh, they must have been a bad person themselves, or it must be something wrong with him that they didn't pick up on this, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people think that way because it helps them feel safe walking through the world, thinking like,
Mm.
that could never happen to me. And I think we see like a similar mentality with like school shootings, for example. People know that the United States is very dangerous. They know that we have this obsession with violence. And
Hmm.
yet every single time it happens, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened to me." And I'm like, Really? Like, can't you?"
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think I think it's just, I mean, I think we have to sort of wake up as a culture and realize like you are not immune to this.
Hmm.
And typically people who are dangerous and scary like this, they're not going to go pick somebody else who's also dangerous and scary. They're going to pick somebody who is caring, who is empathic, uh,
Just a
and
good person.
and a good person, right? They're going to
Yeah.
come after good people because why would they go back? Why would they go after someone as evil as they are? They don't want to get themselves into it, right?
Right.
So I do think that there is a common misconception, or I don't even know if it's a misconception or really just I think it's this protective mechanism people have to try and focus on what the person did to get themselves in that situation instead of focusing on what is a society we're doing that is creating these people.
Yeah. You know, you also make another good point because my cousin, he thinks I'm crazy, but I was like, I think it's time that we start teaching my niece how to survive, God forbid, if there's a school shooting, because there was just a
Yeah.
school shooting, what, a day or two ago in Atlanta. And he
Hmm.
was like, well, I don't want to put fear in her. I said, yeah, but I also want her to be prepared,
You
unfortunately.
want
But
them to
that's,
survive. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that, I think that we also need to start talking about toxic masculinity. We need to
Hmm.
start talking about the culture of violence that we have in this country.
Yeah.
Just today at my daughter's school, there was a bunch of little boys that were taking off their shirts and wrestling on the ground right on school grounds, right? And the parents were standing there laughing about it, and I was mortified. I was like, this is not funny. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's like Lord of the Flies. And I'm like, did you ever read Lord of the Flies? Like, Lord of the Flies was literally about like the moral depravity that happens without like parental oversight, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, why would you be laughing about this, about your kids sitting here fighting on school grounds with their shirts off
Right.
in the middle of the day? Like, and so I think about these things and I'm like, I think one of the misconceptions in society is that we don't like to hold ourselves accountable for the
Mm.
culture that we're creating. And then when it happens to us, we're like, oh my
You and
God,
that
I'm
girl
so
surprise.
surprised. I can't believe this. Like,
Right.
well, we're all contributing to it, right? Every single parent who was sitting there looking at that and not saying anything about it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and even my 5-year-old, I asked her, I said, did any of the girls take off their shirts and start fighting? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she's like, no, mama, they know we can't, like, we know we can't get away with that. And I'm like, at 5 years old, we have already internalized here that women cannot get away with, or, it's like
Mm.
somehow okay for men to act a certain way. And so it's like, it's all fun and games until those little boys become men who
Yeah.
assault and rape people. And we all act like we don't know where it came from. It's like, I know where it came from. It came from the playground when the
Yeah.
kids were sitting around watching and not doing anything about it.
You know, I have a whole section about this, but the other person that was also the culprit in your story, I felt like was society.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just, so I tell people a lot that, people are like, oh, well, are you angry at your ex? Or like, do you feel like justice was served? And I think that the thing I tried to get across in my book was like, my son's father is not the demon in the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, yeah, it's not that he's not responsible for what he did. He absolutely is. And he's a horrible person who deserves to rot in prison for the rest of his life.
Right.
However, the demon in my story is the system, and
Yeah.
like the like literally injustice system, right? Because this man was enabled for over a decade, and
Yeah.
son wasn't even the first person he killed. So we can look at the situation and be like, okay, he did this, but the thing that really keeps me up at night is that the people who enabled him are still walking the streets, making the same mistakes, having not learned from what happened.
Mm-hmm. Still protecting the law.
Exactly.
What was your life like before you met Prince's father?
Uh,
Because I feel like you was lit. Like you had a good job. You was a CIA agent. You had your own
yeah, I mean, I had a
condo.
great job. I was overeducated.
Yeah.
I came from, a good family. I think like if I were to describe me, I was very naive,
Mm-hmm.
and I was taught that you don't judge a book by its cover. That's not what I'm teaching my kids. I'm going to teach my kids if you have a weird feeling in your gut about ways
Trust
to say
it.
books or acts, it's okay to keep it moving. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not being mean, that's being self-protective. Um, And I think, yeah, like I think there was somebody who right after my son died had the nerve to say, well, you know, Mother Teresa never falls for Saddam Hussein. And I think the whole idea was she was trying to say, oh, there must be something wrong with me because I felt.
Right.
And I was like, actually, Mother Teresa is the kind of person who does fall for Saddam Hussein because that type of person is going to try to see the good in everybody, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that's your flaw, like your logic is flawed.
Hmm.
Uh,
Now, can you share how you first met Prince's father? And what were your initial impressions of him? Because when I was reading it, I was like, come on now. Come on now.
I know, right? Uh, I mean, okay, I think I say this in the book, like society is a traitorous bitch.
Right.
Society is a traitorous bee.
No, we
I
gonna
think,
curse. Because the whole time I was like, girl, like this nigga is trash. Like
oh, he was terrible. He was
he sounded
terrible.
crazy.
I think I think that, I won't lie, I was not in the best place when I met him. I
Hmm.
was, I had just returned from serving overseas, and anyone who has been in sort of like a US government overseas, State Department, military, they're all sort
Hmm.
of like similar in this way. People get married very young,
Hmm.
and it's typically I was stationed in a place where everyone was married. It was pretty much just like me and the really young Marines that weren't.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had just spent years with people being like, "Why are you still single? Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you still single?" Mind you, I was still in
Hmm.
my 20s, so it's not like I was, like pushing 50 or anything.
Right.
So single. I was super young. And so when I came back, I think that was weighing on me. I felt like I was running out of time, even though that sounds silly now, like in my early 40s, I'm like, okay, like this is ridiculous. I
But
had
that's
time.
what society that's how it would make you feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was rushed. And I remember, it really was a perfect storm. Like we had just had a snowmageddon in Washington, D.C. I was just starting to sort of try to meet people. And at the time, internet dating was not that popular. I mean, everybody was doing it, but nobody was willing to admit that they were doing it.
Right.
And but there was really it was really hard to organically meet people, similar to how it is now, really, right?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't in school anymore. I didn't want to date anyone that I had worked with, right? Been there, done that, didn't want to do it again.
Right.
And I was kind of craving a relationship with somebody who was not in my circle. I was like, I want someone out of my circle.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I'm like, there is safety in dating someone who like you at least can vet through friends, but that's a whole other thing, right?
Hmm.
And so another mistake I think I made was that because it was snowing outside and we couldn't actually leave, we had had several phone conversations. And
Hmm.
you can't really catch a vibe for someone over the phone. Like you're hearing them, and like he was a great storyteller. And so we spent several times on the phone. And by the time we met up in person, I kind of had this like false sense of loyalty where I was like, oh, I
Mm.
feel like I have to see this through because we had such a good conversation. And again, going back to like, the first time I saw him, he did not look like his pictures. And
Yeah.
I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach. Like I remember talking to my friend. I was like, Lisa, he doesn't look like the pictures. And Lisa's like, you gotta go, just leave. And I was like, I can't leave. That's mean. And in hindsight, I'm like, I should have left, right? I should have just left.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't because I had this feeling of like, oh, well, that's really mean to like look at someone and be like, oh, I don't want to sit and have coffee with you because you like look a certain way.
Yeah.
But realistically, like when you're dating, if you think someone's not your jam, like it's not mean. You could just be like, okay, like you catfished me, right? Like these pictures are not like, I
Right.
mean, it looked like him. It just looked like he was much older, and just there was something about his vibe that was off. I was like, it just doesn't. Something's
The
not
way he dressed, the way you
the
describe
way he
him.
dressed. That something was off, right? But I think the hard part in like anyone who's dealt with a psychopath, and I don't even say narcissistic personality because I feel like there is a difference between psychopath and somebody who's even just on the spectrum. But
Right.
people like this have a tendency, once they sort of have you in their grasp, they can be so charming that it almost just makes you forget, like you just see a different person,
He
right?
definitely love bombed you.
Oh, he loved Bond Me, but he also, it wasn't just me. Like he had people working for him. He didn't pay his lawyer more than $600 the whole year and a half
Wow.
that we were in that whole fight. I spent over 150 grand in 15 months trying to protect my son, and he paid $600. And it wasn't because like, she was doing this pro bono. Like I think she actually fell for him. Like
I
I
think
think
they was messing around with each other.
it, I could not come right out and say what I thought because you're not supposed to do that in books. You're not supposed to.
Well, you gonna do it on here.
I didn't want
We
to be sued, right?
right.
But there was a lot of stuff, like even just the police. It's like I I will never know what exactly motivated these people to continue to protect him. I have theories, of course, like
Mm-hmm.
I think, like I have heard rumors that there was something that he had on the police, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would certainly make sense given
Like a
all the
trafficking
things
ring.
that they did. Exactly. Like that would make sense.
Right.
Was it ever proven? No, but it just doesn't, like there's no logical explanation to
Yeah.
why they behaved the way that they behaved. And knowing what I know from other police officers who were in that department, mostly female officers who were basically whistleblowing on them, like there was just some shady shit going on. And
Yeah.
I don't know, right? Like, but see, that's to me, like those people are the demon in my story
Yeah.
because they're still out there and they never had their day in court, right? Um, and so that to me is scarier because he didn't act alone, like
Mm-hmm.
he just one single person could not have carried out the death and destruction that he perpetrated for over a decade if it hadn't been for people helping him.
Yeah. Now I will say this, y'all, because I don't want y'all to think that my guess was just all naive, because my guess over here looking like a young Vanessa Williams in her prime. So
I appreciate that.
yeah, so I don't want y'all to think like, oh, she ugly, this and that. Like, no, like this can really happen to anybody. So
Yeah.
with that being said, but also I'm so surprised that you said that you were so naive, because being that your dad is from the South and he's like a black man,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
surprised like he taught you how to be tough. So I'm surprised that you feel
Yeah,
like
but see, I mean, even I think like I think there is a way, and I described this in one of my opening scenes in the book. Like my dad had this way about him where he raised us as though we were growing up in the 60s in Mississippi, right? And like
right.
we obviously weren't, right? And I think that, part of the reason I put that in the book is I think that there is a there's probably a deeper discussion that needs to be had about generational trauma, right? I
Mm.
think a lot of people would read that and be like, "Oh my gosh, he was abusive." I didn't put that in there to say that. I put
Oh,
that
I
in.
didn't get that from them, but I'm also from the South too. So
Exactly. And that's the thing.
right.
It's interesting because black people and white people have had completely different responses to that
Right.
scene. But what I was trying to explain is there was a way, like I was raised that when you are in danger, you don't
Hmm.
flip out,
You
you
keep
get
your
out,
composure.
right?
Yeah.
You have a certain level of composure. And I think that some of that is remnants of generational trauma because like we had to be a certain way, and
Yeah.
that's what we teach our kids. Um, but I think that the interesting way that it played out in my story is that when I was in situations where I had to like talk to the police about what was happening, they had an expectation of a way that I should be acting based on what I was saying, and I
Hmm.
wasn't acting the way they expected, right?
Hmm.
Now I didn't deal with black officers, right? All
Right.
of them were white officers, and perhaps they didn't understand what they were seeing, right? Um, or there was something else going on, possibly. Uh,
Right.
Either way, I think even if you're prepared for it, I think there's still a certain level of naivete that you experience. Like, I think many black people or most black people grow up knowing that like police brutality is a possibility, but
Hmm.
there's a difference between like thinking you're prepared for it and then how you act when it actually happens, right?
Hmm.
And so I think we also, in order to survive, we sort of have to live in this like we have to have some of this like cognitive dissonance between like what we know could happen and like
Yeah.
really feeling like it's going to happen. And so even though, I mean, part of being trained uh at the CIA is like you're trained to be aware,
Hmm.
but you can't live with the level of hypervigilance like
Yeah.
every single day, right? Like, and so when you're on US soil and you're feeling comfortable and you're feeling at home, you're not going to be living with that sense of hypervigilance,
Hmm.
and you're not going to expect, like, I think that, we all take for granted, like when someone tells you something about themselves and you're dating, like you're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to just like run his social security number, right?
Right.
And we also have to realize, like, back in 2010, 2011, like even just Googling somebody wasn't all that easy,
Yeah.
right? Right now it's like
I
you
mean,
can,
times have changed.
times have definitely changed. And like I did Google him. There was nothing there, right? He did change his name.
Right.
So I didn't have his real name. But I think even if I had had his real name, like the police, all the other things that he had been involved in, they had never released his name publicly.
Hmm.
So, like, unless I knew more information about him, there was nothing, there was nothing to find, right?
Right.
And even ultimately, when I hired the private investigator, by that point, I had had his social security number just based on paperwork we had filed for my son. And
Hmm.
so, like, that's not something that I would have had like pre him being born. It's not like he was going to be like, oh, and my social security number is, X, Y,
Right.
Z, right? So I think, and I like I said, I mean, I think we just take for granted, like if you see someone who owns their own house and they have car, they have been raising their other son, and presumably they work, like you're not gonna just like I don't think anybody would
You're
make
gonna
the
take it for face value.
exactly. And like I wasn't gonna make the assumption that he was living off like social security death benefits from the people he had murdered. Like
Yeah, that
who
was
thinks that,
crazy.
right? And so this just like it was so completely out of my normal construct of like what happens in the world
Yeah.
that, it's like, so yeah, like he dressed funny, but other than that, like there, and then for someone to present to you, like, everyone's like, oh, you should meet their family. I met people who said they were his family.
But I
I did
thought they
not
were all
realize
weird too.
they were all a little bit strange too, but like realistically, when someone's like, I'm his aunt, I'm his uncle, and then you don't find out until you meet his real aunt and uncle, right?
Right.
That these people were not even related to him. It's like, how do you know? It's not like I was doing cheek swabs and like,
Right.
DNA tests to see if they were actually related. So I don't know. It's a mess. Like it's crazy, but I think that perhaps to the degree that it happened to me, it doesn't necessarily happen to that degree on a regular basis.
Hmm.
But I do think that there are a lot of really problematic people in the world.
Yeah.
And, I have heard stories of women who get into relationships and the man steals the money, or,
Hmm.
like there's just a lot of really bad people out there. And, um, I hooked into a particularly terrible one.
Right.
But I don't think it's as abnormal as people think. I think that it's just that people typically like this do not get away for so many
Right.
years with what he got away with.
Right. Do you think there's a lot of serial killers walking amongst us? Because I think a lot of people do some weird shit.
I think there are a lot of morally depraved people walking amongst us. And I think there are a
I
lot
like
of
that.
people who think that, who, if they thought they could get away with it, be a
They'll
lot
definitely do
worse.
it.
And I think that people also don't realize that there are many people probably living amongst us who have killed people who have gotten away with it.
Hmm.
Um, because if you look at my ex, for example, like, I think he probably killed more than three people. I think the
I was
three
just
is
about to ask you
more than
that.
we know about, right? Um,
Hmm.
but he lived in New York for a very long time, and we never found where he came from in New York. I mean, it was like literally he popped up in Virginia. And so, I suspect he had a whole life there, and a whole bunch of dead bodies that nobody ever
Right.
did with him.
Another thing that I thought was weird was that he shared a bank account with a man. And you mentioned briefly in your book that y'all spoke about the concept of being bisexual.
We spoke, it wasn't that. He
Because I'm like, why is he sharing this account with this man?
he wanted to be a swinger, but it was
Hmm.
interesting because he waited until after I was pregnant to be like that was part of his lifestyle.
Right.
I think that I don't know. he calls this man his cousin. This man is not related to him at all.
Right.
I don't know what he had on this man or what was going on there, but I know why he didn't have a bank account in his name. It was because a lot of people were trying to sue him,
Mm.
and he couldn't have any money in his name, or else all of the people, all the creditors and everything, he was basically, I forget what you call those people, but like he wanted to make himself to the point where he could do whatever he wanted to people financially, because he had stolen money from people, he had done all sorts of crazy stuff, and he just didn't pay a bunch of bills. And so he wanted to make himself basically like sue proof.
Man, I'm surprised ain't nobody put him down.
I mean, it is fairly amazing, but then if you think about it, like there's a reason people like this don't go after bad people, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to go after somebody who's going to have the same, moral compass as you,
Hmm.
obviously it
One
gets
of us
it
ain't
gets
gonna
more
make it.
dangerous,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so he knew that he was not, he didn't go after people who were going to come after him like that.
Yeah. And I also got the sense that you might have felt a responsibility to fix or save the relationship because of societal
I
pressure.
think so. I mean, I think like
Because you really tried.
I was raised in a in a I was raised with Christian culture where, you stay with the father of your child.
Hmm.
And I think that I certainly spent a considerable amount of time feeling responsible and worrying about my son not having a father. I mean, the irony is that I'm a single mom by choice now, and like chose
Yeah.
to have my daughters by myself. I have evolved in some ways. Not that I don't think men are important. I absolutely do think men are important. I think that kids need uh kids need healthy role models. And I think that society's obsession with children having a mother and a father, and it is misguided.
Yeah.
And you look at like Barack Obama, who was raised by a woman,
Hmm.
became president of the United States, clearly
Hmm.
did well for himself. You look at Kamala Harris, who like never talks about her dad. I think she mentioned him once, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
she turned out just fine. So
Hmm.
not to say that like, I I think it's great if people have both parents in their life, but I think that in hindsight, I think what I should have realized is that this man was toxic.
Hmm.
And but another problem that our society has is that the way our family courts are designed, they aren't looking at making sure that healthy parents are attached to kids. They're making sure that parents have the right to be attached to their child regardless of whether or not they're healthy.
Yeah.
um, and I also think there was part of me that knew that too, so I felt like, maybe if I save him, maybe if I fix him, which is one of the most dangerous things that women do often. I mean, people, I mean, I've seen men do
Yeah.
it too, right? Thinking
Yeah.
you can change someone or fix someone is just, you know, it's an exercise in futility.
Yeah, but you make a good point because I feel like as a single woman with no kids, and I do desire to have children and, hopefully have a good man that can be
Mhm.
my husband. I feel like since I'm so focused and trying to do things the right way, that a
Yeah.
lot of people judge me. And sometimes it does get to me because it's like, damn, like all my friends are either, married or they have kids and stuff. And I just know that what you water will grow, and I water my business. So I feel like when I was reading your story, it really resonated with me because I just felt like you just wanted love. But I
Yeah.
feel like the timing of it, society just really just it makes us feel like we're not worthy or we're not woman,
Yeah.
a real
And
woman.
that's the thing that's hard about it, because like even now it's like I don't want to get married because I have feelings about being financially and legally connected to someone.
Yeah.
But I do want to find a person. I want to feel chosen. I want
Yeah.
a partner,
You're
right?
not dating?
That's a whole other can of worms.
Oh. Y'all know I'm gonna try to get the tea.
I mean, okay, like I am dating. I
Okay,
am not,
good.
I am dating in the most casual sense of the word. I think that the hard part is I think you have to be I think you have to be open to finding a needle in a haystack. I don't necessarily think there's one person for everyone only. It's just that like you have to go through a lot of bad
Yeah.
dates. And at this point in my life, I'm struggling with time and
Hmm.
trying to make the time between like my career and my kids and like all the things I want to do,
It's
right?
a lot.
It's a lot. That said, I am hopeful that one day, plus the caveat is like, I really hate app dating. Like really, really, really hate it.
Yeah.
And I think it killed dating. I really do.
I'm not gonna lie. So, I mean, my listeners know this. I joined an online app, and I would have never thought at this age that I would be online dating. Like, I hate it. Like, I feel like there's no real connection. I feel like the niggas
Mhm.
is weird. I feel like
It's horrible. And
it
they
is
can't carry on the
horrible.
conversation. Like if I have another man text me good morning and that's it,
And what you doing?
I'm just gonna like lose my mind. It's like I don't know. I'm awake and getting dressed. Like, do you have
I'm
nothing
texting
else?
you, right? But then I feel like when I go outside, like men would stare at me, but I feel like they never come up to me. I feel like they
Mhm.
intimidated by me. I feel like once they know who I am and like what I do and who I'm affiliated with, I gotta make sure that they have good intentions. Like I just feel like it's just so fucking ghetto.
Mhm. I think the hardest part though, and this is why I think app dating and internet dating ruined dating, is that before it existed, people had to talk to each other.
Right,
And so we've gotten so accustomed to like being trolls behind screens and like
right.
not taking, just like not taking chances and going up to people and saying hello. And it's hard because, unless you're in a social setting with someone like work, your kid's school,
Right,
whatever, places that you don't necessarily like want to be dating, because if it doesn't go well, you're sort of
right. It gets weird.
thing and it gets all weird. Um, and so I don't know how to I don't really know how to put myself out there at this age, with kids and with a career and like, not all the time in the world unless I go on apps. And then the apps are just full of just
Yeah.
shenanigans, And so I every once in a while I like dip my toe in the water and then I'm just like, I'm dipping right back out,
Right,
right?
right, right. Right. Now, I feel like after reading your story, you don't believe in an abortion, but I feel like you was kind of hesitant once you found out that you was pregnant. Is that
I
right?
didn't say I
Or
didn't believe in abortion. I
okay.
I don't I'm very much pro-choice.
Okay.
Um, I think that for me, and I don't know whether I put this in my book, I can't remember whether or not I mentioned it. I had had one already.
Oh, no, you didn't put that in your book.
So the first time, my first time was not consensual,
Mm,
and it resulted in a pregnancy. And I remember even back then, and I was pretty young. Uh, I mean, I was out of college, but still pretty young.
yeah.
Um, I remember thinking to myself, like, I am pro-choice, but I also like love kids and feel very responsible, for like all of my actions, right?
Right.
Uh, when I had it, when I had the non-consensual encounter when I was raped, I also was wise enough to know that like I was like I do not think I can bring a child into this world knowing how it happened and also like potentially continuously being connected to this person
Yeah.
that did this thing. And so uh after that, you know, when I got pregnant with Prince, uh I guess in my head I was like, this is not the same situation.
Hmm.
I'm old enough and I have, a fairly stable career. Like I can take care of this child and like I wasn't I wasn't considering that I wouldn't end up with his dad. Like at that point, I was like, okay, it it felt to me like it would be irresponsible to make that decision.
Right.
Um, in hindsight, I should have, right? Like I love my son and I'm grateful that I got to know him for the 15 months that I got to know him. But I think realistically, like if I had had the option, I never would have wanted him to have to go through what he went through.
Yeah.
So, but it's like hindsight's 2020, right? Like And I think that, part of not making the decision to have an abortion was probably also somewhat trauma based.
Yeah, I was listening to one of your interviews from a different show, and you said that your son should have not been born.
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, like that was real.
I mean, it's sad, right? And like
Yeah.
I say that just being a complete realist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I don't think he should have ever been conceived. Like I should never have met his dad.
And you
Um,
didn't even enjoy the sex with him.
exactly.
I
I feel like I
was
didn't get
like, what
anything
are
good
we
out of it.
doing here?
I know. No, it was terrible. It was a terrible situation. And I think like, I mean, if you watch the movie Get Out, it was like I was in the sunken place.
Yeah.
Like there's no other way to describe it better than like being completely in a sunken place. Um, and I think it's really hard to describe what it feels like to be in an abusive relationship
Hmm.
if you haven't been in one. Because I think people are often like, I can't stand when people are like, well, you should just left.
Right.
It's like, well, that's like really sweet and like, special snowflake of you
Supportive. Right.
to think that that's possible. Like, or that's
Yeah.
easy. Like, it's like by the time someone shows that side of them, it's too late, like just leaving. It's like, yeah, the woman before me tried to just leave and she's dead. Like,
Yeah.
so uh, yeah, I mean, I think it's also really easy for people to make assumptions
Hmm.
that, just because of the way someone looks or whatever, that like you're completely secure, right? Um, because I wasn't.
Yeah. So what was the turning point when things started to go wrong?
I mean, I think that it was probably when I got pregnant. I mean, I think he realized he had me and he was not
Yeah.
wrong. Um, and I think that was sort of when the mask started coming down and I really just started I felt like I was chasing the person that I thought he was in the beginning, and that person
Hmm.
was not who he was. And so I
At
was
all.
constantly trying to bring that person back.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember there was this moment where we were in like a deposition during our court case, and he looked at me, and it was like this moment where he was like trying to get empathy. Like he was like, I can't, like it's me. And I almost threw up on him. I was like, how could you try? Like, how could you now? Like at this point, when I know what I know.
Wow.
And so I turned to him and I'm like, I know who you are now, so fucking knock it off. Right. And it was funny
Like
because like
stop it.
his face, it just like went right back to being a monster. It was like he turned it right off. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, like that is such like that is a level of evil talent that
Yeah.
is, if you could bottle it up, you could probably like be very effective at warfare because I mean, just being able to turn it off just like that um was so
It's
calculated
scary.
and
Yeah.
scary. Yeah, because when he was on, I mean, he had people eating out of his hand. And I mean, I remember what it looked like in court, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, how the hell do you believe him? And then I thought to myself, of course, I believed him. So
Yeah. Yeah. It was another part in your story when I think you were sleeping and you were pregnant and you felt like you couldn't breathe. And I'm like, is this nigga trying to suffocate her?
I think so. I think he was.
Yeah. And when you woke up, he was standing over you.
Yeah, like it felt like, and I've had this conversation with his now adult son about what it felt like to be in that house. And it felt like one of those like horror movies where there's like a house of mirrors and you're just like
Yeah. House
trapped
of
and
Horrors.
you like can't figure out what is real and what's not, because he would do things that were just evil. And then, like even like the suffocation incident, like I woke up and he's hovering over me and I'm just like, what the hell, man? Like, uh,
Yeah.
and he's like, oh, you must have had a nightmare. Oh, it must have been your hormones. Like it just, and I remember thinking, like, I just don't know what's real and what's not real. Like I felt like I was going crazy. Um,
But how could you not feel like that?
yeah, I mean, it was just crazy. Like it was a whole, it was a whole crazy, uh, it was a whole crazy situation. And, I think similar to a lot of abusive situations, like they'll punch you in the face and then they'll make you think that like you somehow punched yourself, or
Right.
you
You
did
fell on his
something evil,
fist.
or you like, yeah, you fell on his fist, like you
Right.
deserve it or whatever. And I mean, so I think back to that time and I'm just like, and it's interesting because it's like I feel like it was a different lifetime. I feel like I was a different person. I know that I'm like the essence of me, right? Like the essence of me is the same,
Hmm.
but I feel like I just feel like I feel woke, right? I feel like I
Yeah. You
am
found
now.
yourself.
I also like I I understand the world. I feel like I understand the world in a way that I never could have imagined pre him.
Mm.
And I think it's impossible. Like I think sometimes I'm like, okay, did growing up in this like sheltered Christian community like harm me in some way because I like,
Mm.
didn't see this part of the world. Like even from, I don't know if I put this in the book, but like I remember being in elementary school and them bringing police officers in and being like, they're here to help you and this and that and the third, right? And
Hmm.
like that's not what I tell my kids. Like, sorry, all police officers, right? But like what I
Right.
tell my kid is if you ever need help, you call me, right?
Hmm.
Because it might be dangerous for you to call the police because they might get there and they may actually not be on your side. And it's like
Yeah.
a harsh reality, but it's real, right? Like when you start thinking about like the way our systems work. And I guess like in some ways it's scary, because like the
But it's a
prison
reality.
it's the reality, right? So I
Yeah.
feel like it's impossible to survive a situation like that and still walk around like somebody who doesn't know what's going on in the world. Like it just starts to make you question, like, okay, like, what are all these things for?
Right. But I also feel like given that you was a CIA agent, I feel like your expectations of the legal system is, of course, is going to be high because of you technically is a part of that world.
No, I mean, FBI is like they're law enforcement, but like, I,
But
I,
still, like you still have some type of dealings with them, right?
I mean, yes and no. Like, I think it's different though. Like, I think that, a lot of my job was around like researching like international threats, right?
Right.
And that's like, or like international threat intelligence and things like that. Like, that's very different than like homegrown terrorism, right?
Right.
Like I think that's uh, yeah, like I just I think it is a very it's a very unique situation to be keenly aware of the type of crime that occurs on our home soil. Like I was not
Hmm.
trained in that, right? Like I wasn't trained to be looking for it. Like,
Right.
you know, and I also it wasn't enough of my experience to even be thinking that it was at my front door. Um,
Yeah.
and I also don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know how you prepare, kids for that. Like,
Yeah.
I think I'm hopeful that I can talk to my kids about my experience without trying to transfer anxiety onto them, just to be like, hey, like you you can't trust people, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I say this knowing that even after my ex, like
Or
I've had
trust your gut.
trust your gut, right? Like I but I think, yeah, I mean, it's not just romantic relationships either,
Oh no, definitely platonic too.
Yeah, like
Because bitches be weird.
I had a former business partner that turned out to be like completely horrible. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's like I don't know, like we all continue to make mistakes or whatever, and people continue to do this sort of thing. But I think that with this level of trauma, it's like it's hard to go back to like that kind of like naive, you know,
No, you can't go back.
happy person. Not necessarily not like I'm a very happy person, but like I think I'm just aware of
Yeah.
how the world really is, which maybe makes me cynical and perhaps that's why I'm single. But
But I also think, I mean, given the journey that you've been on, I think it's normal for you to feel this way because what you've been through would have broke a lot of people. Like you don't look like what you've been through.
Well, I'm glad about that.
Yeah, because what you've been through was a lot. Because even thank God for your dad, because when y'all discovered that your ex raped your sister, and I have never wanted your dad to like pop off on him because I was just I
Yeah.
could not believe that that was the next part of the story.
I actually am very thankful that he didn't kill him that night. Um,
Because I
because
couldn't imagine.
I think that would have been terrible. And I mean, I think that, I
It
don't
would have been
know,
heartbreaking.
it would have been terrible. Um, and it would have ruined many people's lives. And yeah, I don't,
I'm just glad he was there because I also feel like if you didn't have your dad presence, I think that your ex probably would have tried it even more.
oh, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think he thought my dad was going to, I think he thought my dad was capable of killing him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I've said this to his older son before. I'm like, 50% of the people who lived with this man in his adult life are dead. We're the only two that survived.
Yeah. And the son barely survived.
Yeah, like I mean, he literally is like the boy who lived. Like, um, you know, I don't know. It's crazy. Um, I think that though, like, I think choosing to survive, and I've known a lot of people who've gone through
Mm,
like really terrible things and similarly terrible things, like people who've had I've met a lot of people who've had children murdered by their ex, right? Sadly, it's a club that no one ever wants to be in, but we're in it. Um,
right.
and what I typically tell people is I'm like, um, it's a choice to keep living. It's a choice to decide that you're going to live your best life. And if you if you decide like if you can't get past it or you like continue living in that misery, understand that that's
Hmm.
also a choice, right? I think sometimes people choose to remain a victim, like
Yeah.
they don't want to get out of it. They feel like sort of some sort of comfort in that or what have you.
Hmm.
Um, for me, like I choose to live my best life because I know that that's the only way my son keeps living. Like if I chose that, like I could have also chosen to die with him, right?
Yeah.
But I think if I had done that, then he would have then there'd be no part of him that was still living.
Hmm.
Um, and also like I think I think that in many ways, like my ex, it would be winning for him, right?
Yeah.
He wanted to destroy my life. He wanted to destroy me. Um, and he didn't succeed.
Yeah. Now, when you hired the private investigator, what were some of the things that you found out on top of him killing two other people, which was his
I mean,
mom
he
and
had
the mother of his
assaulted the
child?
business partner. He had stolen money from multiple people. He had changed his name to his son's. Oh, I didn't even put that in the book because
No.
it was hard to explain. So 6 months before his ex-girlfriend died, the mom of his older son, he changed his name to his son's name. And then when she died, tried to claim that her life insurance policy was for him and not for her son.
Wow.
Yeah. It was crazy. Like when you like when I read when I poured through all the information, because part of like taking a decade to write the book was like I wanted to be the reason it took so long is like I wanted to hold myself accountable. I wanted to make sure I told the story in an authentic way. And I also wanted to make sure that I like got the facts right. So I was pouring through all this data trying to make sure that like I I had the chain of events and like all the things that happened. And it was just crazy. Like
Yeah.
even just looking at the autopsy reports from his own mom, like you can't suffocate yourself to death, right? Like the bag was not tied to her head. It wasn't like, like if you press a bag to your head, you will pass out and then you will start breathing.
Right.
So like it's actually physically impossible to kill yourself the way that they said she killed herself.
Wow.
And I have since had police officers tell me that her suicide note, and I put that in quotation marks, was not in her handwriting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they had all of this. And like, why did no one charge him with that?
Yeah, even when y'all went to the police and you told them about the situation with your sister, and I'm like, the fact that they charge y'all for
Yeah.
because they thought you was lying. And I'm like, where is this? Like, where are y'all at? Because this cannot be real.
It was like, I mean, it was literally like the Twilight Zone.
Right.
And, I was just telling someone today, they were like, oh, yeah, I know. Like, I dated someone from Gainesville, Virginia, which is Prince William County. And I was like, man, they could cut Prince William County out of the United States, let it float off to sea. And I would be like, peace. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on in that county, but it is like, I mean, I know that in our country, we refuse to believe that women get raped. It happens a lot. And
Yeah.
frankly, like back to what I said earlier with the little boys on the playground, like I think we have this tendency to be like boys will be boys and that's just how they are. And like, what did you do to like make him want to rape you or whatever? And so like
Hmm.
I know that it is common for police not to prosecute rapes or people not to believe women. But when someone like this comes in and
Right.
you know that he's killed multiple people, that they knew who he was in this town. And I remember a police officer saying, like, yeah, he's not a good guy, but he's not a rapist. And I'm like, are you
Wow.
kidding? Like, so what? He's a killer, but not capable of rape? Like, come on.
And why would your sister lie about that?
She wouldn't. It's crazy. Like the whole situation is crazy. Um, it's just crazy. But they also thought I was lying. They were like, "Oh, that never happened." I'm like, "I have two witnesses." Like two witnesses, and if my son could speak, he'd be a third.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you think that if you weren't black, that the outcome would be different?
I think about that a lot, and I think perhaps, you know, I do think that I do think racism played a part,
I
both
do
in
too.
what happened with us with the police and
Yeah.
also what happened in family court. I do think it played a part. Um, but I also think that you can't ignore just how this police department acted and the lengths that they went to sort of like cover up their
To
misbehavior.
protect them. Yeah.
And so, it leads me to wonder, look, my ex didn't kill people who weren't black. We all had something in common, right?
Right.
Um, and so I think there is something to that, right? Like he didn't date women that weren't black. And I think that, even though he liked to walk around saying he was Dominican, motherfucker was not Dominican. Like he was white Puerto Rican.
He was white Puerto Rican. Because I
Like
Googled him. I'm like, yo, he
he's not
looks
black, right?
right.
And when it came down to it and it was his word against mine, you know, and I think that was another thing that made me that I have learned. I think, as black people, we have a tendency to like, kind of like try to wear our degrees as like
Mm,
as
a
like
badge of honor.
yeah, or it's gonna protect you from something, right?
Right, right.
And so I thought I had the misguided idea that because I'm educated and because I had a good job and all this stuff, that somehow I could like come into a police station and be believed. I
Hmm.
think at the end of the day, like we cannot wipe our blackness from our skin.
Yeah,
So it's like you can have a whole, you know, m- like you can drape yourselves in your diploma and that's not
yeah.
going to protect you because it doesn't matter. Like when they look at you,
They see a black person.
they see a black person, right? And
Yeah.
and like and so, but then again, like I can't I do think that there was something with my ex and the police. There's too many people in the system that have told me that there's something with my ex and the police. I think it got to a point, if I hadn't gone to the media and blown it up, I don't think he would have ever gotten arrested, even for killing my son. I think they would have been like, oh, he died of natural causes and just like brushed it under the carpet.
Listen, I'm not gonna lie. When I was reading the story and I felt like you were starting to find your voice, I was like, come on, that's what I'm talking about. Like you was not playing. And I was just so proud and so happy for you because it was evident from where we first started in the beginning of your book to where we at towards the end, or even now, like you really stood up for yourself and you wasn't afraid no more.
Yeah, I mean, I had nothing to lose at that point. Like that's why I tell people all the time, I'm like, I am the system's worst nightmare. because
Because
my
you was
kid
giving
is
them
not here
hell.
anymore, right? So I'm like, you can say or do whatever you want. I'm not going to be in family court, and that's one of the reasons I had my kids via donor, because
Yeah.
I feel like I can't be quiet. I feel like part of parenting my son is continuing to speak out about this. And I think if I had to worry that like one day my kids could be in family court again, even if I like loved the person and thought they were great, like I think there would always be this fear in the back of my mind, like, oh my gosh,
This happens
what
again.
if this happens again, right? And so
Yeah.
now I'm at the point where I'm just like, you know what? I can say whatever because I'm not in that system anymore and I'm not gonna be.
Yeah. Can you share how much you ended up paying in legal fees throughout the entire process?
Yeah, it was like a little bit more than
Because
150,000.
it was a lot.
It was a lot. I felt like, I mean, I'm thankful that my parents let us live with them, which was, I don't know how I would have like afforded to rent anywhere because I was using my entire salary towards legal fees. Um, and I liquidated all of my 401k and all that stuff from
Yeah.
the government just because I was like I can't not fight, like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have to. And these attorneys, I mean, they're like,
They were
between
trash.
250 to $400,000 a year. Uh,
Yeah.
or I'm sorry, 250 to $400 an hour. And
Hmm.
so when you like what people don't realize, like even sending your attorney an email, they'll charge you a half an hour just to read the email. So like think about every time you send an email, that's like $200 right there.
Hmm.
Um, and it adds up, it's like it's so expensive.
But you also made a good point in your book about the importance of having a therapist so you can avoid
Yeah.
all those fees.
Oh, totally. And I think I made a lot of mistakes early on because I was just like a walking trauma bond or a
Yeah.
walking trauma bomb. It's like I would just pour out everywhere. And, I really, really people need to separate like that is your attorney and you need to have a therapist for you,
Yeah.
to kind of process what you've been through. Because if you try, look, your attorney will let you. They'll just be like, sure, I'll charge you $400 to keep talking.
But they didn't even do nothing. It's like, where's the integrity at?
I don't know. Like but see, that's part of, I think that if we took the money out of family court, I think kids would be safer. And I
Mm.
think people in the system don't want to hear that, right? But it should never come down to like how much money someone has to be able to
Yeah.
protect their kids, right? Because it sets up a system of inequity, and it also it 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 puts people in the game with false motivations, right? So
Hmm.
like they let him go pick his own therapist to give his
That
psychological
was
evaluation, right?
crazy.
And so he picks this woman who's not even licensed, right? And it's like I feel like people are just you can pay these people to say whatever you want. And if you had licensed therapists that worked for the courts that didn't have like, a skin in the game for like honesty, and you take the money out of it, like you take the private money out of it, it becomes like a more equitable process and it becomes more authentic because you aren't going to have a situation where someone's like, oh, I'm going to say this because they paid me and now I feel weird about like, calling them a
Yeah.
psychopath.
Yeah. Throughout the custody battle, you advocated so strongly for supervised visits as if your spirit knew something terrible was going to happen. Did you ever feel like a deeper spiritual intuition guiding you, warning you for what's to come? Because I feel like when I was reading that part about your son and like you was going so hard, like it's like you kind of knew that you
I
were
knew,
preparing. Yeah.
I remember. So when they lifted the supervised visitation, I called an organization called Child Justice. And the first thing I said to them is, I think he's going to try to kill him. I need to try to appeal this. And unfortunately, my son never lived long enough for us to do an appeal.
Right.
Um, and I think it's like, how could you not worry about that after learning all that I learned? And I mean, I remember this supervised visitation provider, she was like, oh, do you think he has a policy on him?
I
And
thought
I
that was
remember
crazy
being so
too.
mad. I was like, why would you say that unless you know something?
Right.
And I remember I called insurance companies asking, and the reality at the end of the day is unless you have the policy number, you can't get that information. And the fact that he said that I was dead, and no one checked, like these insurance companies just took out like hundreds of thousands of dollars on my son under this
Wow.
false reality that I was dead. And I didn't even get a right to know. Cause like if I had known, I could have taken that to police, not to say that they would have done anything
But here's
because,
the motive. But yeah.
but at least it would have been clear. Like I could have taken it to the court to be like, hey, look, like, we see here two other people who he killed for a life insurance policy, or at least we suspected, and now he's got a policy on him. Like, I mean, I wish I had had that information because at the end of the day, like having a suspicion isn't going to be something that holds up in court. And I didn't find out about the policies until 2 weeks after he died, and the police gave it to me.
Wow. Is there a place for forgiveness in your journey? And if so, what does that look like? Just with the people,
Uh,
and not just with your ex, but just with the people who were supposed to protect you
that's a
and your
good question.
son.
So I remember right after, I think I put this in the book actually. So like right after my son died, I remember being um at the funeral, and I was talking to the priest, and I said to him, I said, I don't understand the I don't understand how somebody could, like, I hate when people say, "Oh, you should forgive," and like somehow it's like gonna set you free, right?
Right.
And so he said something that was really wise, and he was like, forgiveness should be um should be only for people who have the capacity
Mm,
for understanding what they did wrong and truly feeling something about it, right?
right.
And so he was like, right now you're angry. And he was like, you hold on to that anger because it's that anger that's going to get you justice.
Mm,
And I appreciated him so much because I made the assumption that like because he was a man of God, he would be like, you have to forgive. And he's like, fuck that, right? Like
right.
forgiveness is not, like, he was like, it's a waste of your energy, because he was like, look, forgive yourself, right? But like, if I think my ex is useless for me to ever even think about like spending the energy required to even consider what forgiveness of him would look like. I
Right.
do feel bad for him, right? There is a part of me that like is sad for him, because I think somebody who is incapable of connecting to even his own son, that's a very sad human condition, right?
Yeah.
And so I do feel bad for him. I think his mental capacity or whatever was going on in his head, that's a sad existence. I don't forgive him because I just don't think he's capable. Like I don't think he is, I don't think his brain is capable for to really have like attrition for what he did. So I think
Right.
that's never gonna happen. Um, as far as other people in the system, I think I would have forgiveness, but it would require what the priest said, right? It would require them to acknowledge the harm that they did and
Yeah.
actually do something to work towards making sure that it doesn't happen again. And I haven't received that from anyone in the process.
Mm,
And so I think like that is something that for me it would be required to extend that. Like I can think about, like, for example, the judge. I think in many ways he
oh,
was,
he was disgusting.
oh, he was a fucker. Like
Yeah, piece of shit. Like the way
um
he talked to y'all in that courtroom was crazy. It's
and
like go home.
he has never apologized publicly or privately, has never apologized. He's talked to third parties, and I've heard back from him. He retired after, like, he resigned or whatever. But like I'm like, if you can't be man enough to just say I'm sorry, even privately, right?
Right.
Nothing has said zero words to me since my son died. And so I'm like, do I forgive him? No.
Yeah.
Because even though this is a man who goes to church every Sunday, right? I think he is, I think he's a lost cause, like
Hmm.
if he look, he's gonna have to be on his deathbed. He's gonna have to go and deal with his own, like,
He know he fucked up though.
of course he knew he fucked up. I'm just saying that, like, I would like to believe that if I had committed the same atrocity, I
Yeah.
would at least have the decency to say, I'm sorry for
Yeah.
what I did, right? I'm sorry for what I said to you. I'm sorry for how this turned out. I'm
How I
sorry that
made
your
you
son died,
feel.
right? Because, like, really, at the end of the day, I can't sue him. He's completely unsuable, right?
Right.
So it's like, what are you going to lose by just being decent and saying, I'm sorry?
Right. But how can we hold the legal system accountable? Because unfortunately, your story is very common. So, what can we do, especially in the family course? Because the one good thing about your book is you definitely gave a playbook on this is what you need to do and avoid when it comes to being in family course.
Yeah, I mean, I had two reasons for writing the book. One of them is I wanted to write the book that I needed while I was going through it. And two, I wanted to give a playbook for, people who want to understand all the things that are wrong and want to make changes. Um, I really think that there are so many things that can be done on the state level. I think many of the laws that need to change are the state level, but I also think
Hmm.
the federal government needs to take a stand because I think that what's happening to kids in this country is one of the biggest civil rights crises since the civil rights movement with Black people. Um,
Hmm.
and I think the sad reality is that kids can't vote. And so politicians aren't thinking about the kids. They're thinking about making parents happy, right?
Mm.
And so, what I think the federal government needs to take a stand on is I think they need to hold states accountable for not having child protective policies in place. And there are ways to do it. We've done it before. Like when
Yeah.
they didn't integrate the schools, the federal government was like, well, okay, we won't pave your roads. Right.
Right.
And so there are ways that the federal government can hold the states accountable. They just choose not to. And I think that it's gotten to a point where I think as society, I say this all the time that so many people choose to ignore this because they're like, well, I don't have a kid in family court and my kid is safe and fine. But what I always say is like, what happens when that kid who's been terrorized for the last 16 years knocks on your door and wants to take your daughter to prom,
Yeah.
right? Now it's your problem.
Hmm.
And we don't live in a bubble, it's like you work with these people, you encounter them at the grocery store. And so I really think we need to, as a society, invest in protecting our kids. And the way we do that is instead of thinking about parental rights and how much time a parent should get, I think we really need to think about like what is in the best interest of child safety, especially when there's like a safety risk at play. Like no
Hmm.
kid is going to die by having to have supervised visitation with their like, derelict parent. Like
Right.
it's like, okay, they get access to this person. Like I was not fighting Prince getting to know this man. I just wanted to make sure that it was in a safe environment and that he wasn't going to be able to kill him. Because
Yeah.
realistically, like, Prince could have been in supervised visitation for his entire childhood and he would have been just fine. He probably would have eventually figured out his dad was effing crazy, right?
Right.
But he wouldn't have been dead.
Right. Do you ever think about what your life would look like if he was still alive?
I do. And it's really hard because I often wonder if there was a world in which both he and my daughters could exist,
Mm.
which is a really hard thing to think about. Like I wish there was. Like I sometimes think about like, would they be fighting with him? Would my oldest be like, like Prince is coming into my room again and like being annoying? Or
Right.
would he be like, she stole my computer or whatever? Like, you know, I would love to imagine that world. But I think the sad reality is I also cannot imagine um, a scenario in which that was sustainable because
Yeah.
I think that my ex was so deranged, um, that I don't know. It feels very much like Prince never had a chance, which is part of the reason I go back to like he should never have been born because I think that it was horrible to put him through that. Like
Yeah.
I would like to believe that I gave him the best life possible, but I also am realistic enough to know that I was not the best version of myself for him. Like
Yeah.
my daughters see a very different mom. Like I am a better mom to them because I can be, because I'm not, like I think what's hard is like when you're in this like heightened state of acute trauma,
Hmm.
you can never heal from it, right? Because you're constantly in it. And
Yeah.
for
Trying
his
to
entire
survive.
life, yeah, like for his entire life, I was afraid that he was going to die. And I was like I think back to like the moments that I was on an email or a phone with an attorney and not spending time with him, and I'm like, gosh, I wish I could have those moments back. Because it didn't matter, like it still ended up the way it ended up, and I would
Right.
give anything to like hug him again. and I don't have the, I don't have that opportunity. He's not here anymore.
Do you still keep in contact with his older brother?
I do, yeah. He is a great kid. I mean, he's a guy now, so I can't call him kid,
Yeah,
but
he's
I'm
a
always
man
gonna
now,
see him.
right?
I'm always gonna see him as a 10-year-old. I don't care how old he
Right.
is. And I've told him this before. I'm like, look, you're 10. Like, I know you're 25, but you're 10.
Right.
I think I I want the best for him. And, I tell him a lot, like, I call him my Suno because he was
He
like
was
my
your
son
first
number
son.
one. Like, I feel like he's the kid that, you know, he made me feel like a mom, which was also really hard because I think my attachment to him made it harder for me to leave his dad when I should have.
Hmm.
Um, because I couldn't take him with me. I mean, even in the end, it was a decision where I was like, I can't save him, but I can try to save Prince. But it's
Yeah.
still, it still weighs on me having had to make that decision to leave.
Hmm. What do you hope that he takes away from this journey?
Um, for my book or just the journey? I mean,
Just
I think
overall, because I wonder, does he ever talk to you about how he feels or how he
we talk
felt?
about it. Yeah, I mean, I think that I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a kid in that environment, right? And
Right.
I think he has a lot more to unpack than even me because I think what is hard is that I mean, I think even dealing with him, like I've realized kids want to love their parents, right?
Yeah.
No matter what, they want to love their parents, which is why I think this whole like when people say parental alienation, I'm like, that's bullshit. Like kids want to love their parents. So if your kid is telling you something about a parent that's negative, like trust and
Hmm.
believe them. So I think that what's hard is that it's still his dad, right?
Yeah.
um he's certainly aware that his dad is who he is, and he's not, he doesn't have rose-colored glasses to think that he didn't do what he did.
Right.
But I think it's a very different struggle, you know um and I would have had it with my own son, right? Like if Prince had survived, I think that there is something he would have carried, knowing that this person who was capable and who had like perpetrated such terrible things on people was related to him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he's gonna have a lifelong struggle with that. When I gave him a copy of the book, and before I gave it to him, I said to him, I was like, I want you to protect your peace. I'm
Yeah.
giving you this because I love you, and I want you to have it, and I want you to like have the opportunity to one day like read what I felt during that situation. But I also, want you to know that if you don't read it, it's going to be okay. Like if you and 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 to be conscious of how you're feeling, because I think it's very different for him having lived his own version of it.
Yeah.
Um, and he was super little. I mean, he was only 10.
Yeah.
Um, and seeing
Yeah.
my oldest right now, who's 10, like, I mean, I cannot imagine her having to kind of deal with all that.
Yeah. We're almost finished, but one of the most beautiful things that you said about your son Prince, I don't know if I read it or you said it in one of your interviews, but you said even at 15 months old, he was able to do something impactful, which was he was able to stop a serial killer.
Yeah, I mean,
And I thought that was so beautiful. I was like, wow.
I think that, I mean, I have long held the belief that our kids find us. And so I talk to parents about this all the time, parents who are like struggling to have kids or parents who have lost a kid. And I'm like, I think they find us.
Yeah.
And, either via adoption or whatever, like they find us. And I think that my son came here for a reason. I think he chose me because he was like, this woman is not going to stop, right? Like she's gonna do what needs to be done. And he's
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna put a finish to this man, and I'm gonna do it where nobody can say that like I did anything because I'm just a kid, right? And so I
Mm,
do feel very strongly that he chose me and he came for a reason. Um, Prince, I still wish that maybe you had chosen someone else.
yeah.
Or like thank you for this honor. Um, but it also, helps me feel like I feel like he had a part in choosing my daughters to come to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it makes me feel like connected. It makes me feel like there's someone also connected to him, which is special and powerful. And yeah, I mean, he was the boy that finally, put this man behind bars. And I have to believe, like, I do think that he would have kept killing. I think he would have kept doing terrible things to people. And so, it is a comfort knowing that, like, that even though my son is not here anymore, like, at least this man is in jail and he can't hurt anybody else.
Yeah. What are the most important lessons you want to impart to your daughters about relationships?
I think that I want them to realize that they are important, and that they don't have to settle for, they don't have to settle, and they can choose their own destiny. And, like, my some people in my family got on my case because they're like, oh, like, my oldest has said, she's like, I'm just gonna get a donor. And they're like, you should teach them that, like, there's all these other things. I was like, I love that she says that, because she knows that it's an option, right?
Right.
And I'm like, I also tell her, like, hey, look, like, there's beauty in any type of way that you create a family, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I want her to know that she doesn't have to she doesn't have to feel like she's settling, right? Like,
Right.
I hope for them that they find very, like, healthy, happy relationships. I certainly want grandbabies, right? One day. But I like that they, at least in that way, are sort of like freed from societal's, like, what is right.
Yeah.
Um, because I think that is the most toxic thing. Like, feeling like you as a woman have to be like the property of a man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of the reason why I'm in my feelings about marriage in general these days, because I'm like, it made sense in the 70s when we couldn't have bank accounts, right?
Right.
But now I'm like, I want my daughters to know that when they're in a relationship, they should wake up every day choosing that person, and they should make sure that that person wakes up every day choosing them.
Choosing them. Yeah.
And not just because they have to be legally attached with them, but just because, like, I choose to be with you because you treat me well, and because I love you, and because you're a good person, and all those things, right?
Yeah. And last but not least, if Prince were here today, what would you want him to know about the work you're doing?
I told him the day I buried him, I, like a crazy person, had a conversation with the corpse. And I
That's
remember
not
saying to
crazy.
him, I was like, Prince, you were not the first, but I want you to be the last. And I'm
Mm,
going to do whatever I can to make sure that I contribute to making sure this ends. And so, yeah, I, I hope that he knows that I'm carrying this on for him. I hope he feels vindicated in choosing me, like, oh, I did the right thing because she, like, did what I wanted. But I also hope that he, I've tried to work really hard on forgiving myself.
mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that I'm very sad about is just, I feel like I feel in many ways I failed him by not making it so that it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's, yeah, I mean, I would tell him I'm sorry.
Have you
Um,
forgiven yourself?
I don't know. That's a good question. Like, I think I have in some ways. Um,
Because I feel like it's a wave.
I think it's hard to completely feel like I don't have any accountability, right? Because I think that there's still a part of me that is like, I actively made the choice to be with this person, right?
Right.
Um, and I think it's not necessarily I blame myself. I just feel like a level of sadness that I wasn't able to protect him. Like, I
Yeah.
tried really, really hard and I wasn't able to do it. Um, I think the thing that bothers me the most is, like, I go over and over, and it was part of the book too. It's just like all these things happen, and I still feel like if one thing had been different, he'd still be
Yeah.
here. Um, and so that's the hard part that's hard. Like, I think part of the trauma and, like, the acute trauma of going through it is, like, you always feel like you have to be a step ahead of the crazy person. but it's like there's no knowing,
Yeah.
um but it still doesn't feel good because you're like, damn, like if I could have just done one thing different, if I could known this thing. um so I don't know. I mean, I think I have forgiven myself, but it's still, I think I still hold a certain level of just like anger and disappointment, that I'll probably always hold because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't save him.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm proud of you. I think that your story is definitely inspiring, and I know that it is saving a lot of people. So, I think that if it makes sense, this wasn't in vain. And I
Yeah.
think I think you're doing it. Like I think that Prince came here for a reason because he knew that you was gonna fight and you fought a really good fight. Like, God forbid something was to happen, I got my money on you.
Well, I
So
appreciate that. I mean,
yes.
I'm hoping, like, I want to start a movement, and I'm hoping that people will
You
get the
you
book,
did start a movement.
Defying Silence, go out and buy it, go buy it for a friend,
Yeah.
download the audio.
Yeah. And then I'm surprised. Have anybody reached out to make this a movie or something? Or like
Not yet, but I'm still like, I joke with friends. I'm just like, I feel like I've lived a bad lifetime movie, so I feel like, you know.
yeah, because we need a movie. Like we need something because I think that a lot of women and men can relate to your story.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly love for the opportunity to have more people be aware, and not just for, like I said in the book, like not just for trauma porn, but really just so
Awareness.
that people understand, like I want people to walk around as woke as I am, like so they start to think about like, okay, like I let's stop trusting people with the same level of trust.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to have you on, y'all. I read her book literally in like 2 days. So I'm looking forward to keeping in contact with you because I definitely want to have you involved in some of the things that I'm working on because I'm really big on people sharing a story because you never know how your storyline can be someone else's lifeline. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And to the listeners, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please make sure to email me at hello@thephdpodcast.com. And until next time, everyone, later.
Bye bye.
Oh, so you're not gonna say bye?